Sometimes you find yourself in a boring place. And not only that, sometimes the weather and the light is also super boring. That was the case for me the other day when I wanted to just take the first photo walk of the year in my town. And it was a grey day, there was nothing special going on, and I have been taking the same walk now a few times, so I didn't feel very excited. But I got an idea, and I did something that I normally never do, and it resulted in me getting a lot more good photos than I would normally get. And in this video I just wanna explain what I did and how I did it and the results. If you're new to this channel, my name is Micael Widell. Welcome. I've been doing videos about street photography and macro photography on YouTube for more than 7 years. If that sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing. So I remembered this video I did a couple of years ago in the forest where I did something called ICM, Intentional Camera Movement, which is when you set your camera on a very slow shutter speed, like 1/10 of a second, and then you take your photos while moving the camera to create interesting patterns and a painterly look to your photos. But I have never done this in the city before, and in the city you have a lot more to photograph than in a forest. You have people, you have cars and bikes and a lot more going on, so I figured let's try this to see if I can get anything interesting. What I did was I set my camera, my A9 Mark II, in shutter priority mode, basically the S on the dial on top of the camera, and then I set the shutter speed to 1/10 of a second. All the photos I'm showing here in this video are shot at either 1/8 or 1/10 of a second. You can see below the photo exactly what settings were used for each photo. But basically set the camera in shutter priority mode, then the camera will make sure to always use the shutter speed that you have set, and all the other settings will be adjusted to that. And then I had it at auto ISO, and of course the aperture was adjusted automatically, and usually it is pretty high because it needs to be that in order for the shutter speed to be so slow. I also made sure to disable what's called steady shot, which is in-body image stabilization on my Sony camera. That way I get the true photo that you get with a slow shutter speed without the camera like stabilizing the photo, because in many cases when you use a slow shutter speed you actually want an unstable photo, you want some movement. And to be sure that I get this, I disable the image stabilization altogether. I also set my camera in burst mode so I could get a quick series of photos for everything I photographed, because one thing I learned the last time I did slow shutter photography was that you typically need to take maybe 10 photos or 20 of each subject, and then you get maybe one of them that stands out and that is interesting, because you want a good balance between blurriness and sharpness. I think a good slow shutter photograph needs a balance of some blurriness in some parts and some sharpness. And when you have a good mix of these and you get a good shape in your composition, then you can get a very interesting photo. And to get that, you usually need to try maybe 10 or 20 times. And then if you set your camera in burst mode, you can just hold down the shutter, move the camera a bit. First hold it still maybe, then move it up or down, and then to the sides, and then maybe in circles. And try all of these things for each subject and look at what you get, and you will quickly learn what kind of movements you can make to get certain effects. Of course you don't need to use 1/10 of a second, but I think it's a really good place to start. It is not too fast, you get some blurriness, but it is not too slow, you get some detail as well. And if you keep the camera still, you can get fairly sharp photos, but if you move it a little, you can get interesting effects added into your photos. One thing you need to be really careful with though is that your memory card might fill up very quickly, because it's so much fun doing this, I found. But when you have burst mode and you're doing lots of ICM, you will very quickly take many photos. I actually took 1,600 photos during this 1 to 2 hour photo walk, and I filled up my 64GB memory card. I think for the first time ever, basically. I have never filled a 64GB memory card before on one photo walk. One thing that is fun to do is to find things that move, like bikes or cars, and then just follow them with the camera while you're taking the photos. That usually creates interesting effects. And even people walking, if you just try to follow them exactly with your camera, you can sometimes get the subject pretty sharp while the background has like a motion blur. Another thing I really recommend is when you move the camera, the intentional camera movements, ICM, when you move the camera to get the effects, try also stopping it exactly when you're taking the photo, because then you can get part of the photo sharp because the camera was still for maybe half the exposure, and then you also can get that combination with movement because the camera was moving for half the exposure. Of course, this is really hard to nail when you're shooting at 1/10 of a second. This is a bit easier if you're using an even slower shutter speed, like maybe 1/2 of a second. Another thing I love is to look for bokeh balls, like look for bright lights in the background, maybe street lights or something like that, and make sure that they are in the background of your composition while you move the camera, because then these bokeh balls will turn into bokeh worms and you can get interesting patterns. I had a lot of fun on this photo walk, and I got many photos that I think were pretty interesting, and they all have a bit of a painterly feel to them, right? They almost look like an oil painting, and I really love that look. And what's nice is that you can have boring scenes, boring places, boring gray light, as I had this day, but still get interesting photos. So I really look forward to trying this more. I love this style, and I love how many keepers I can get per hour spent photographing. That is a metric that I'm really keen on keeping high. And I know for sure that if I had gone out on this day doing my regular photography with a regular fast shutter speed, I would not have gotten many keepers, but thanks to the 1/10 of a second in shutter speed, I think I got at least 20 photos that I'm gonna keep and that I'm fairly happy with. And those are the photos that I have shown you in this video. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you want more photography videos.